Revolutionary greetings, comrades. As we draw closer to the year, it's important that we look into our electoral calendar for Africa. We are left with about 2 or 3 countries that are supposed to be holding elections in 2022. Somaliland was scheduled to hold its presidential elections on the 13th of November 2022. But on the 24th of September 2022, it was announced that these elections are moved or postponed to 2023. We will analyze Somaliland. I remember it was in 2021 with a discussion on Somaliland in Sandton, where the comrades from Somaliland were giving us a feedback or an update on what is happening in Somaliland. So we will do a proper research, look for those notes, and do a presentation focusing on Somaliland. One thing that inspired some of us about Somaliland is that they produce their own food, but we will deal with that when we get there. Sudan is supposed to be holding its presidential elections, presidential council, legislative elections in December 2022. We will check on the date if indeed the elections are going to happen in Sudan. We know the challenges that we are facing in Sudan. Tunisia is going to hold its elections on the 17th of December. So these are the elections that we are looking forward to before we conclude the year. What is interesting about Tunisia is that it is going to hold its elections when the African National Congress will be having its elective conference in Nazareth. It starts on the 16th to the 20th of December 2022. We have already discussed in the previous video the conference or congress of ZANU-PF. So in this video, we simply want to focus briefly on the upcoming elections in Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea is supposed to be having its elections on the 20th of November 2022. There are 3 presidential candidates that are vying for the top job, as it were. We will do this in 2 parts. This brief video, we want to do a historical background to Equatorial Guinea so that we have a basic understanding on what we are talking about or the country that we are talking about. But you remember also when we're focusing on the French or France influence in Africa, we did speak to Equatorial Guinea and the other Guinea. So you can refer back to the videos in this YouTube channel. You'll be able to recap so that you have a better understanding on what we are talking about. So here we'll simply do a brief historical history, and then in the next video, part 2, we then look into the candidates, the campaign in Electoral Guinea, as will be concluded. And then, of course, later on, we look into the outcome of the elections. Guinea, what is interesting is that Equatorial Guinea is the only African country that uses Spanish as an official language. It's quite interesting. It is the only African country that uses Spanish as an official language. Historically, just a chronology of events is that in 1471, Portuguese navigator Fernando do Po said he sighted the island of Fernando Po, which is now called Bioko. I've always had problems with the Europeans who are claimed to have discovered that in Africa, as if we did not exist. Mosia Tomb, which is Victoria Falls, is said to have been discovered by some European, Robert Moffat, when indigenous people in what we call Victoria Falls today, but it's a discussion for another day. Then in 1777, Portuguese seized islands of Annobon and Fernando Po, as well as rights on the Malian coast to Spain, giving to access to a source of slaves. So it was used. These islands were used as as part of slave trade. We will discuss the question of slave trade when we then do our political education. We are assisting trade unions and our new members in the Zimbabwe Communist Party, trade unions in Zimbabwe, and our new members in the Zimbabwe Communist Party in a brief educational, political educational sessions that we'll be holding. So we'll discuss this when we discuss capitalism. In 1844, Spanish settled in what became the province of Rio Muni mainland, which is Equatorial Guinea. In 1904, Fernando Po and the Rio Muni became the Western African territories, later renamed Spanish Guinea. In 1968, Spanish Guinea granted independence and becomes the Republic of Equatorial Guinea with Francisco Macias Nguema as president. So Equatorial Guinea gained her independence in 1968. In 1972, Nguema becomes president for life. You remember in that era, where again, which I think we discussed this question, the one-party state, which was not a dictatorship of the proletariat, but it was a dictatorship of individuals who would then declare themselves president of life. I think we've discussed also this question, and it is those that are opposed to our ideology then would claim that that period was under socialism, which we've argued and demonstrated that it was not. In 1979, Nguema was ousted in a military coup led by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasango, who's the current president. So the current president, Nguema, came to power through a coup. And we discussed in previous videos about the military coups, mainly in West Central Africa. We said some coups are counter-revolutionary and some coups are progressive. So we discussed Mali, we discussed Libya and other countries that went through this process, that is the coup. Elections, of course, elections then started happening in 1993. First multi-party elections were generally condemned, of course, boycotted by the opposition. You remember in the early 90s, 1990, 1991, what was termed as the winds of change across Africa. So Equatorial Guinea also held its first elections in 1993, and President Obiang Nguema was re-elected president in 1996, winning 99% of the votes, which of course it was said the elections were rigged, irregularities and so forth. And then it was in 1996 that in March that Mobile Oil Corporation announced that it has discovered sizable new oil and gas reserves. And of course there are reports of human rights abuses which are documented starting from 1998, when Amnesty International reported that scores of people, mostly from the Bubi minority, were tortured, arrested in the wake of attacks on military posts on Bioko Island. Bubi, interestingly, there is a tribe called the Bubi, and in Zimbabwe, as you know, there's an area, a geographical area called the Bubi. It's a district, actually, Bubi district. I don't know how we came to have that place called the Bubi. Maybe one needs to do a research on the origins of that place in Zimbabwe called the Bubi district or Bubi constituency. I'm not sure whether it's a district or it's a constituency, but it's Bubi. But here in Equatorial Guinea, you have a minority group, a tribe known as Bubi. So the Amnesty International and the other human rights organizations have been documenting human rights abuses happening in 1998, 1999. There's also reports of the oil boost that, as we said, that in 1996, oil was discovered. So in 2001, economy emerges as one of world's fastest growing because of oil exploitation. But of course, this opposition was saying the growth was slow, too small because of corruption. And in 2001, exiled leaders who formed a coalition in Spain and formed a coalition in Spain with the aim to overhaul politics at home, saying democracy under Obiang was a shame. So Equatorial Guinea, as we have said, is the only country in Africa that has Spanish as its official language. It is a former colony of Spain. So those that your opposition leaders and those that will be running away from the rule of the current government will escape to Spain, where they then organize one leader at some point had his asylum document revoked by the Spanish government, later on restored, but then later again arrested because he was said to be mobilizing firearms or military hardware to go and fight in Equatorial Guinea. So elections, by their nature in Equatorial Guinea, have been problematic. There have been attempts for a coup in Equatorial Guinea. But what we all remember, which is of course famous to most Zimbabweans, is the arrest of Simon Mane and his friends at the Robert Mugabe International Airport in Harare in 2001, when they were en route to Equatorial Guinea, where it was said they were part of the mercenaries that wanted to go and stage a coup and install opposition leader. You remember the famous arrest in Harare, the trial that happened in Harare, and Simon Mane later extradited to stand trial in Equatorial Guinea. There were also South Africans that were arrested, were part of the Simon Mane team, which also drew in the son of the late British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher as also a part of the brains behind the attempted coup in Equatorial Guinea. So like I'm saying, as I conclude, that elections have been problematic in Equatorial Guinea, but we are having elections coming up on the 20th of November 2022. So we thought we needed just to do this brief historical background, and then we will then analyze the three candidates, presidential candidates, the political parties. I think in the last elections, the current president won about 98% or so of the votes. Equatorial Guinea, also remember, some of us who love football, it hosted, was it in 2014? It was chosen to host the African Nations Cup after Morocco withdrew, or it replaced Morocco. Initially, Morocco was to host the African Cup of Nations, but then Equatorial Guinea took over. Morocco at the time was citing fears of Ebola. So please, comrades from the African Diaspora Forum, most of them are from West Africa. So you might have more to say or to share with us about Equatorial Guinea. You might understand the preparations for the elections, or what is happening. We know, of course, that France sentenced the vice president, who is actually the son of the president, for a suspended of 3 years, citing corruption or money laundering and so on. And I think some publication some years back, it was reported that the son of the president, who is now deputy president, was buying some properties in Cape Town, while the people of Equatorial Guinea are not benefiting from the oil spins. But the leadership, as always in most parts of Africa, are living large when the mass of the people are poor. Please share your views with us about your understanding of Equatorial Guinea, how you understand the campaigning going, and please subscribe to this YouTube channel and circulate this video. Otherwise, Amandla, comrades.